Hello everybody and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about data-driven modular programming. Last time we talked about the very basics of modular. Basically, how do we use variables and arrays in a way that lets us kind of separate a switch from the lights, for example. Whereas today I'm going to do something that when I learned how to do this, it was like my aha moment. I lost my mind when I realized you could do this. Because not only is it going to help with your performance, you'll realize every game on the planet does this. Okay, not every game a lot of games do this. The last episode also had a few technical issues. Hopefully those have been resolved. If things go to hell, well, we know they aren't. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and head over here to my content browser. You'll see that we have the light switch from last time, but now we also have BP Axe and BP Shield. This is basically how a lot of new people start to interact with Unreal Engine in game development. If you have a separate item, a separate entity, it needs to be a completely different blueprint, but we're going to make that not the case, because not only is it more efficient to just have it be one blueprint, it's easier for you, and if you have designers that aren't programmers, they'll be able to come in and use your blueprint a lot easier. For example, if we open up the axe here, you'll see that right now it's just the static mesh. However, you might actually add like a box collision so that way you can pick it up. Have some stuff on the event graph for picking it up, and you might have things like, I don't know, the damage variable, which of course would be something like a float. The weights, etc, etc, etc. Whereas with the shield, it's going to be completely different. It might still have weight on it, but it's also going to have things like armor, which the axe just isn't going to have, so why would it be included? And then you kind of develop both of these blueprints separately, so that way they act and behave different because they're just different items. However, if you're going to make a full-blown RPG, or if you want randomized stats and things like that, all of a sudden this becomes a lot more difficult. How do we randomize the static mesh? How do we randomize the different variables here? What if we want 100 different axe types with different static meshes? Are we going to make 100 different blueprints? Well, when you're new, you might just do that. And don't feel bad. Again, if you're new, you're new. You're supposed to find this stuff difficult. Don't give yourself imposter syndrome. You can do it. So to start out today's lesson, the first thing we need to learn about are parent items. And we're going to start learning the definition of a parent to child relationship and how it works. However, I'm going to show you that through example instead of going in through a giant explanation. Let's go ahead and create a blueprint class. We're just gonna make an actor, and instead we're just gonna call this BP item. That's right. This is gonna be the parent class of all your items, unless it's a very niche item that's completely different. But you'll see why that might be a special scenario. Doesn't matter. BP item. Sometimes in my naming conventions lately, I'll even just do BP parent item to really solidify this is the parent object. Okay, let's go ahead and open up the BP parent item. Last session, do you remember how we started talking about a high-level object, something that's very undescriptive, like I need a building, versus a very low-level object, which is something like I need a Walmart that has exactly 37 people in it. Very different, right? One's very obtuse. You could choose any building you like. One very specific. Well, let's look at the other BPs real quick. With the BP axe, notice that I have static mesh axe. The name is literally BP axe, and we're gonna go ahead and create a bunch of variables that give the axe a bunch of attributes. Notice that we're creating something very specific in the blueprint. What if we can create something that is just ready to be filled with information, but isn't quite filled yet? Well, that's the point of having a parent item. So let's head over to our parent BP. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to ask ourselves, I just took my meds. What we're going to do is ask ourselves, what do all of our items need? Everything else can be added separately. For now, we know that we're going to need a visual representation, so we need a static mesh. Now, instead of calling this like SM axe or shield, let's call it SM item. And we're not going to define SM item. We're gonna let it be empty. Now, there are cases where there are developers that actually have like a static mesh they use whenever it hasn't successfully like been replaced by something. You'll notice this in games like Warcraft 3, for example, specifically Reforged. They had a problem where like textures wouldn't load and stuff, and they have placeholder objects. These are essentially things that didn't get the data that we're going to program. So you can go ahead and put this here if you want. I personally don't, to be honest. I don't know if it's a bad habit to not, but I don't. But I need to be honest with you. I don't know if it's a bad habit, but I don't. So we know it's going to have a visual representation, a static mesh. And honestly, for the items I want to create, that's pretty much it. Except, what about all those attributes? For those that play RPGs or even more modern first-person shooters, anything that lets you really customize your loot, have you ever looked at a tooltip? This is a tooltip. Let's notice some things about it. It has a name. It has a resource cost. It shows the cooldown. It shows how long it takes to use the ability. It shows a description of what it does, including how much damage, the chance of something happening. Essentially, it's a collection of data. However, just like the blueprint we're creating, these tooltips don't exist pre-made. There's not a huge folder in your directory with a billion tooltips. They're modular, they're dynamic, they populate as they're needed, just like the blueprint we're going to create. The reason I showed you that is because we're actually going to create something like a tooltip. It's called a structure, and it's going to be a set of variables that travel around together. Kind of like an object, like I mentioned earlier, but slightly different. Then, after we create one structure, we'll be able to take that structure and put it into a data table and have as many versions of that item as we need. I'm getting ahead of myself though. Let's just do it through practice. So I'm going to go into my content browser and head back to my blueprints folder. I am going to create a new folder and I'm going to call it data. Within data, we're going to create another folder and I'm going to call it structures. And within structures, I'm going to right click, go to blueprint and create a structure. Now, I don't know the exact official naming convention for structures, just going to be honest with you. But what I like to do is type in struct underscore, then of course the name or descriptor. I'm just gonna go ahead and make it items. So this will be the struct for items. And I'm gonna open that up. Now, for those of you that know what it's like to open a blueprint and it only partially opens and you have to click on the open full version of blueprint in order for it to actually open up, you might be thinking that's what's happened on my screen right now. But that's not the case. This is a structure. It's going to be nothing more than a bunch of variables that we're not even going to define. We're going to say the type and the name. That's it. Specifically, we're going to go ahead and start filling out things that you might see on a tooltip, or things that all my items are going to need, or mostly need. If some items are going to need something and some aren't, it's still probably a good idea to put it into the structure, because the occasional empty variable isn't going to make or break your small indie project. But do make these as limited as possible. Regardless, we know that most of our objects or items are going to need a name, something to identify them by. Now, I know there's a specific variable type called name. My honest suggestion is to just go ahead and put it as text, and this has to do with things converting. But don't worry, don't panic. For now, just understand we're going to use text. I'm going to add a new variable, and I'm going to call this power. Now, you might be wondering why I'm calling it power. Well, the reason we're going to have a power variable that's a float is because, for example, an axe might have a certain damage per second, whereas a shield has a certain level of armor. So, by being a very general term of power, they can both use that and it not be weird, if that makes sense. Now we'll go ahead and add a description, and I'm not going to get too into detail with all of these. I think I'll probably add just one more for now. So we have the name, the power, the description, and now we'll add the static mesh. Because obviously all of our items need a static mesh. And remember, this one's empty. It's there, and you'll see why it's there and empty, but we still need to be able to define it, and we will be doing that through the struct, which I know comes across confusing. Why? Because we're not defining anything right now. We're literally just naming variables. Now that that's done, just go ahead and hit save. So this is what our tooltip, or our collection of data, is going to be: a name, a power, a description, and a static mesh. We can go ahead and close struct items. I'm going to go ahead and open up my content browser. I'm going to go back to data, and instead of structures, now I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it data tables. We're going to open it up. We're going to right click, and this one is actually under miscellaneous. So we need to go into miscellaneous, remember our alphabet, and find data tables. Now you'll notice, look, pick row structure. Well, we just created a structure, and if we hit this drop down menu, you'll see that they have a lot that are pre-put into the engine. Now these are things that are either working to help the engine actually work, and then there's the stuff that we created. So we're going to go to struct items, which is what we created, and we're going to hit OK. For data tables, I like to use DT as the naming convention. So DT underscore, you guessed it, items, and I'm going to go ahead and save. With that saved, let's go ahead and open it up. Now, this looks a lot like the structure, but it is slightly different. However, if you look at the top here, notice something. We have a row name, we have a name, power, description, and static mesh. It's using the structure we created in order to create a data table. This is where the magic really starts to happen. Let's go ahead and hit add to add a new row to the data table. Notice we have the variables that we defined earlier by type and name, and now we can actually define the specifics. So here we're going to say name, we're going to call it X. For power, we'll just say like it does, 9001 power. The description, very powerful axe, okay? Very, very powerful. And for the static mesh, of course, we know that we want the axe. And that's it. So if we hit save, we have this collection of data that we have now defined right here. However, don't forget, and this is something I always forget to do, so don't be me. Don't do what I'm doing. However, we need to change the row name. Right now it's just set to new row. If this is an honest question for anyone that's watching, because there's people that are smarter than me that watch these. With the row name, what do you guys use for a naming convention? Because I just take the name that I give the item and make it the row name. So leave a comment below. If you see me down there hearting and liking stuff and replying, it's probably because I'm actually engaging and I really want people to help me out and see what they do when it comes to row names. Sorry, a little bit of a side tangent. Check the comments, you might learn something new. Now let's go ahead and add one more row. I'm going to start by changing the row name. We're going to name it Shield, and we're also going to go down here to name and name it Shield as well. For the power, we're going to make it 1. We're going to call this a very weak shield, and the static mesh is going to be that shield from the blueprint we created. We're going to go ahead and hit save. Okay, with both of those created, let's head back over to the BP parent item. We now need to be able to populate this blueprint with the information we've created in the data table and the structure. Let's start by only doing the static mesh. Let's head over to something a lot of you probably have never used, the construction script. A lot of stuff in Unreal Engine is ultimately for the player. Almost all of the code, the programming, it's all technically for the player. However, the construction script is something for us. It's something that lets us help build the game. Let's start by thinking about the word construction. When something is under construction, it means it's not ready to be used. It's something that happens before you use it. The construction script helps us construct blueprints in real time. And let me show you what I mean. The first thing we need to do is add a new variable. I'm going to call this DT row underscore items. This is going to reference a specific row in our data table. I'm going to put this back on Boolean. This was from testing earlier. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this variable type to data table row, and specifically the data table row handle. We are going to open the eyeball, so that way it's changeable from an instance to instance base, and we're going to hit compile. We have to hit compile because we need to change one of these default settings. Don't change the row name. However, change the data table over to DT items, and we're going to compile yet again. Now we're going to use the construction script to construct the blueprint for us. Let's pull out DT row items and do git. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this pin, and I'm actually going to split the pin. Then this might seem like overkill or like we're doing something we just did again, but it just is what it is. And if I'm doing it wrong, let me know in the comments. We're going to pull out of this execution pin, and we're going to type in get data table row, not names, just row. Now it might seem very, very, very tempting to take this row, plug it in there, take this name, plug it in there. But you can't do that because this is a variable, and since it's a variable, it's a very high level reference. It's not specific, which means that the out row is unable to do anything because it doesn't know what data table's coming in. Even though we have it defined here, it doesn't matter, especially because we made it public. It's basically saying, I don't know what data table's coming in. I can't help you. That is why this is all gray and it won't let us work. However, if we unclick this, which is fine, and we specify specifically DT items, it's no longer a variable because this pin isn't plugged in. It's saying DT items no matter what. And now notice the out row is no longer gray and we can actually use it. I'm going to go ahead and hit compile. Now with the out row, if we pull this out and we click on break, notice we now have access to the name, power, description, and static mesh, the struct we created earlier. Now let's do a little bit of padding to make sure the code doesn't fail. Out of static mesh, we're going to do an is valid check. It's the one with the question mark here. So it's going to run the construction script. And if it finds a row, it's going to go over to the is valid check. The is valid check is going to say, is there a static mesh defined in this row? If there is, then we're going to take our SM item and we are going to set the static mesh. So is valid into there. And we're going to set that static mesh to the one that we have in the struct. If you're lost, don't worry, it's about to become a whole lot more clear. Let's go ahead and hit compile and save. Let's go back to our open world here. And I'm actually going to go back to my blueprint actors, and I'm going to pull out that parent item. As you can see right now, it's still basically just nothing. However, we have the DT row items here, and we can open it up. Now, this has to stay DT items for this specific type of blueprint. However, with the row name here, and this is why we do it this way, by the way, we can now pop this open, and here is an enumerator of all of the items we've created. Now, because we have the construction script set up, when we click on axe or shield, if they have a static mesh defined, they do, it will go ahead and update this blueprint to be the axe or shield. Axe, check it out. Shield, check it out. Remember, this is the same blueprint. It's not the two separate BP axe and shield. This is just BP parent item. However, by using data tables and structures, we are able to get individual values and assign them in real time. However, what about all of the other data? Cool, we got the static mesh to change depending on whether we have the axe or the shield, but there's other elements that need to be transferred over. There's a couple ways you could go about this. If you made enough of the items have the same type of attributes, like for example, using the word power instead of damage or defense, then a simple way to do it would be to add those variables down here and update them in the construction script. You literally have the name, power, and description right here. So you can make those variables here and just set them to the data that's being pulled. However, there is actually another way to do this. And neither is the right or wrong answer. This is going to be depending on what you need. We're going to go ahead and just create a variable, and I'm just going to call it struct underscore items. And for the variable type, I'm going to type in struct underscore items. This one shouldn't need to be public. And we were going to hit compile and save. And then another way we can go about this is I could actually just go ahead and delete all that code. So it's no longer going to update the static mesh at the moment. But instead, we have struct items here. Let me hit compile. Always compile when you're messing with variables, by the way, because Unreal Engine does not like it whenever you have new variables and you're trying to mess with them, but the code's not compiled. Anyway, that was a tangent. Let's take out struct items, and we can actually hit set. And because this data table is a compilation of struct items, we could literally just say if the row is found, I want this out row to be the struct items, and then you could have struct items act as a container for all of that information. So now all that information is saved on the blueprint, and you don't even have to save it as individual variables, by the way, because anytime you access this specific item, you can now just access its struct items and get its name, power, description, and static mesh on an instance-to-instance basis. I hope this tutorial was useful and you understand what I'm getting at. If it feels like a lot or you didn't quite understand it, it's probably because you're new, so it's okay to feel that way. Or I just did it badly. However, I'd like to hope not. Please let me know in the comments section below if you're still lost and have specific questions. If you just say something like, I don't get it, well then I can't help you. I don't know what you need help with. Try rewatching the video, see if you can understand why this is useful, and I hope it helped some of you guys. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.